let's move on to our next boss here. I'm going to actually move on to one of the tougher bosses. So, yeah, some of these encounters aren't super exciting for tanks. Where's my Antoran? Let's go through Antoran High Command. So this is one where it really jumps up in terms of difficulty and how complicated the ability is. And we're going to go through the Fat Boss video just for those of you that have seen it or haven't seen it, whatever. Pretty sure that's the right one. Yeah, it's the Fat Boss video here. And so this encounter is a very interesting one. Some of you guys will like it, some of you guys will hate it. There's a lot of crap on the ground. Blizzard has generally made it a lot easier. Will you be cleaving them down together in 6 months or so? No, it'd be way too much damage. You're gonna get murdered. That's a dog question, Starquake. No, it's gonna kill you still. I think it'll just absolutely murder players, especially if the abilities interact like that. There's no way that you're gonna be able to cleave them. I would put money on it. Okay, so with this one here, so this is the Antoran High Command encounter. Essentially, it is sort of a council fight, sort of not. You're dealing with one guy. What's a good... If you guys remember Iron Maidens in Blackrock Foundry, very similar thing, where there's an active boss, right? You deal with the... Where's my notes here? You deal with one guy at a time, and some of them have shared abilities. And the other ones there. So we'll have the Admiral, the Engineer, and the General in that order. And it always goes in that order every single time. And the first one here, as they get going here, will be the Admiral. Okay, not this one. Let's go start it off here. Let's go... All right. So what happens is they all have shared abilities. So whenever they're out, any of the bosses are out, they will do a frontal attack. Hey, tanks, super exciting for you guys. Make sure you never face these things toward the raid. Their ability to exploit weakness does a crap ton of damage. It's a frontal cone, stacking damage. This is where you're going to have a tank swap as well. Simple, don't face them towards a raid. Whenever the tanks or the generals, the bosses are in a pod, they will also do specific abilities. But when one of the guys jumps out of their pod, you can steal their pod and use their abilities as well. You get some very special abilities that do interact with each other. So with, let's see here. With the Admiral out, you can see the Admiral is out right now. What happens is the Engineer is out, or sorry, Engineer is in the pod, and General is in the pod. When the General is in the pod, right, in his little home base, he spawns adds. A Pyromancer and a Shock Trooper. The Shock Trooper, you can see here, does a Blade Storm, right? So try not to be in the Blade Storm. Dodge it wherever possible. I mean, yes, you're going to hit by some Blade Storms, fine. The other one is the Pyromancers. They cast an interruptible spell that's going to do a lot of damage on your players. Interrupt them, range interrupts. Please, for the love of God, interrupt these things and damage them wherever possible, because they're more of the priority. The other things, we get cleaved down and dotted up as well. Range DPS will do really well on this encounter for this specific phase in general. The Engineer, well, he builds stuff. He's going to build some mines. If you get hit by mines, this is where it's going to hurt a lot of players. If you get hit by mines, yes, you take some damage, but the entire raid takes damage. It takes a stacking debuff. For those of you who remember the Botanist Flame Orb that did raid-wide damage, something very similar. You don't want to get hit by multiple orbs. All right, so essentially you're going through boss by boss ability. Let's go through here. So you can sort of separate into three phases. The first phase is Admiral, second phase is Engineer, and the last one is the General. And it rotates like that every single time. So what's going to happen here is now the Engineer is out, which means the Admiral has gone back into his pod, and the General is in his pod as well, right? Still spawning those adds. Engineer now can no longer spawn mines, so you will no longer have any mines going into it. But the Admiral will do I'm just going to call it an artillery barrage, right? Artillery barrage comes out. What you want to do is have the raid together, and the person that is in the Engineer's pod, well, your special ability, and we'll go through the abilities here in a second, is to throw down this massive shield. Basically, it's a shield emitter. You can see these sort of little green pylons, little green orb things there. If a player clicks on them, it spawns the massive shield. So your job in the pods, number one, is to DPS, right? You better be really quick with your mashing buttons. And number two is to use the other ability to help deal with what's going on in the encounter. Okay, so here, when the Engineer is active, well, you steal the Engineer's pods, you throw down these shield emitters to protect you from the artillery barrage that the Admiral is shooting. At the same time, you're still dealing with the ads, you're still dealing with all this other crap, and shooting those things down. So I think here they actually start going through the encounter. Again, there's the exploit weakness. So again, frontal attack. You can see there the shock troopers moving slowly, and people constantly taking damage. Now, if you look at the raid frames there, and I know, I can't remember which raid frame this is, but there's a dispellable debuff. There's a dispellable debuff there that does more and more damage. At the first part of the encounter, it's not that tough, but dispel it wherever possible because it's going to cause you more headaches later on, and it's a pain in the ass to heal. So here they're dealing with the Blade Storm, and they take some damage, really not a huge deal. Chaos Pulse is the dispellable debuff there. Dispel it, watch out for mines. This is the first phase in a nutshell, right? You're not running over mines because it does throw that fire dot on the entire raid. Boss is faced away from the raid, so typically try to tank him in that various section, right? You can see he's tanked by his pod. Admiral Severax tanked by his pod, facing away from the raid. This is an encounter where, Cleave does decently here, but single target is also a pretty high priority. You don't want to have a ton of AoE DPSers because the players inside those pods, they will also have massive AoE damage going out, shooting onto the boss or onto the ads. So here we're just going through the first phase here. It's every 90 seconds the boss will transition to the next phase. So you'll have 90 seconds of every single one going out. Alright, so we're going to go through it here. Yeah, Fat Boss goes through, Pyroblast, a long interruptible cast, which deals a large burst of magic damage. Make sure you kill those Pyromancers. And again, you're constantly moving from these mines. It takes a few seconds for them to actually, to actually activate, right? Then move away from them, because they will explode on you if you run over them. Yeah, there's a Blade Storm. He does a charge, slows him down a little bit, and you don't want to get charged, right? You can see there the debuff on the left side is the exploit weakness on the tank. The tanks will have to swap as well. Typically, you'll be swapping, I believe, at two. There, you see they swapped at 2. Yeah, 2 for the exploit weakness. So that is the first one here. Let's go a couple seconds forward. Yeah, let's go a few more here. All right. Hopefully soon. All right, Chief Engineer exits his pod. Okay, you're going to see here the actual pod in action. So, fair warning here for you guys. Do you have to manually leave out or we get automatically clicked out? You will. Okay, so both. It'll, number one, you will have to manually leave the pod. So good question there by Salas. How do you get out? Well, it's basically like a vehicle. You get out of the vehicle. If you are in those pods, which you'll see in a second here, watch what happens. This guy's going to bolt it for the pod. He's running in there, right click. And there, you have an extra action button. You can see 2 on his screen. The first one is universal between the pods. What it does is lots of damage, AoE, and damage increasing. It works on summoned demons, doesn't work on the bosses. The damage does, but not the damage increasing effect. So you'll want to shoot things as much as you can. The first one does just damage, straight up DPS. Second one does the AoE damage for the ads specifically. And it's got a bit of a cooldown on. You can see they're casting. You see it's doing a ton of damage. The priest there jumped in. You can see damage meters, right? He's doing 10 million damage, 10 million DPS by AoEing those ads, those shock troopers with the second ability. And the first one, he's just DPSing the boss. That's where you really want to prioritize, right? Really DPS the boss hard with your number 1 ability, Withering Fire. That's the second one here, which he's going to use in a second. Number 2, and it's a targetable circle that he throws out. He almost wasted it there for no reason. Now, the other thing is, when you are inside these pods, you take constant increasing damage. After about 40 seconds, you are going to die. It basically one-shots you. And that sort of limits the players from staying in there the entire time. You want to rotate players. Typically, if you assign 2 smart players to every single pod, and raid leaders know what I mean by smart, you'll do well here. I mean, even a raid leader, you may want to put one of them inside those pods to deal with it. Honestly, I think it's a very simple thing to do, right? You just have to prioritize these things. It's, the smart players were the ones doing Razor Gore back in vanilla. You can see here, this ability really helps DPS. There, you can see it coming down. And there, it shoots and helps kill those ads. Then you get out, right? And you're going to have a debuff. You can see on the right side of his screen, he has a 3-minute debuff, like a Psychic Scream debuff, that stops him from going inside a pod again. You can't have the same people sort of go in and out to reset their stacks. It doesn't work that way. Blizzard has worked around it. Good. So you'll typically want to have 2 people assigned to every pod because it is a 90-second phase, right? At 90-second phase, 40 seconds per person is ideal, right? 40 seconds, and you don't want to go any more there. There you can see 40 seconds. Yeah, after what, it'll just instantly kill you. It's too much. So the biggest thing for your guys as raid leaders, make sure your players are not standing in your mines. Move away from them. Please don't kill them. I don't know if it actually says who triggers a mine, but that would be helpful. So here, Admiral Spherax, yeah, and now it's going to transition here in a second as they're moving the boss away. Yeah, damage going out there. All right, now Chief Engineer. So Chief Engineer is out, which means you're no longer spawning mines. Right? You're dealing with his ability, which is the exploit weakness. That's, again, the shared ability. You are still dealing with ads because the general is spawning them. And now you're dealing with the Admiral's artillery barrage. So remember, Chief Engineer, he's building stuff. We're going to build those little, you can see there's little green text over them, the emitters. So that is your number 2 ability. Number 1 is still DPS boss. Number 2 is spawn emitters. You can see here the guy click the emitter. Everybody needs to get in that shield to take reduced damage. Those artillery barrages do more and more and more damage every single time. So you will need cooldowns. You want to throw down as many emitters as possible. There are only 3 artillery barrages per phase. That being said, you want to throw down as many emitters as possible because you will need them later on. There, so it protects you from a lot of damage. But again, that's 25% more damage every single time. You're going to need your SLTs, your devotion auras, your cooldowns much later on. And you can see here the artillery barrage. The fusillade. So you have the 2 emitters here. Spawn fairly close to each other, right? Again, close to the boss, so the melee can jump in as well. Tank will be staying out for the artillery barrages every single time. Okay, you can see here. So this is the perspective from the actual engineer. Number 1 there is the DPS thing. Number 2 is spawn an emitter. So he's going to target there. You can see him spawn a little green circle. Emitter spawns there. It's got a, 12-second cooldown roughly. And I mean, I don't know how long it lasts, to be honest. I'm pretty sure it should last at least a few minutes. But you want to spawn it every single cooldown to get as many emitters as possible for your phase and the next one as well. Because remember, Admiral is in his pod for 2 phases. That means you're dealing with artillery barrages for 2 phases, but you only get the emitters for 1 phase. So you need to be proactive and spawn them well ahead of time where you're going to tank the next boss, the general. Okay, so here they're dealing with the general. Right, same thing, throwing down emitters, right? Lots of damage going out. You're still dealing with ads. And, you blow them out as much as possible. Blade Storm, everyone's fairly close together still. You're avoiding those mines that are left over, right? The mines are not disappearing on you right now. So again, in about 90 seconds, once these guys are out. And you can see here, on the left side of the screen, you can see an emitter. I can't really show this on my screen right now, but where the DBM warning says Legion Crusaders prepares to fire, on the left side there is an emitter. You're throwing emitters in advance where you're going to need them. All right, yeah, so you have to think about where you're going to place them down. There's the artillery barrage. They've got another emitter here in a second. He places a second one, perfect, and he gets out. So you can see him click the ability, get out. And now they're going to go over to the last one. The emitter's already in place. Awesome. Guess what? Somebody has to actually run into and click them. Have one person assigned to clicking these things. Do not have your entire raid. Otherwise, you're going to just have 3 emitters go off at once and you're going to wipe. So raid leaders assign one person, probably yourself, to right-click these things. You can see here the Warlock is a little bit further out. He's actually not getting hit by that one. He moves at the end there. Moves in just in time. So while the General is up, it means the Engineer, which was spotting the ads, is not out, which means you are dealing with the other abilities. So you're still dealing with the Artillery Barrage. But what happens with the General is it spawns a Disruptor Beacon. And Disruptor Beacon is sort of useless, sort of helpful. It clears mines out, which is great, right? Because you're still dealing with mines now from the stupid Engineer. But it also interrupts ads. At this point, though, because the General is the one spawning the ads when he's in the pod, you shouldn't have any ads up anyway. It helps clear them out. Realistically, it'll help clear mines, which is really the most important thing. So yes, you guys are catching on here. Put emitters by pod 2 and by pod 3, right? So they have emitters here. You can see a couple near the bottom there. They're clicking them. There's the next one. They're all stacking in for the artillery barrage. Again, does more and more damage each time. So make sure you have raid cooldowns available for the later barrages. Basically, you're going to deal with 2 full rounds of this. That's the entire encounter in a nutshell, right? You basically go back to phase 1 now. Admiral is up again, right? You do want a hero at the start of this encounter. Typically, single target damage will be king here. If you have AoE, players or daughters, great. That's going to help out on all of the little ads. Outside of that, focus on single target damage over possible on this one. I mean, that's pretty much it. It seems like more of a complicated encounter. Number one, people have assigned roles here. Your job is to, click the things. For those of you that are going to be assigned to getting inside the pods, make sure you know what you're doing. You're spamming the crap out of your number 1 key to DPS the boss, and number 2, you are using your extraction button or the number 2 key at intelligence spots. Here, they're going to wipe on purpose because they're doing more tries. But again, that's pretty much it. I mean, they all sort of complement each other in terms of what the abilities do. But it should be an interesting encounter. I think it's a tougher one for the 3rd boss, just in terms of how much stuff there is on the ground. I have a feeling it'll be nerfed a little bit, or at least the fire damage will be at some point. I've got an initial feeling that it'll be a tougher boss to start off with, but we'll see. The thing is, though, you can choose any of the bosses in whatever order you want. So you'll do Garoth the World Breaker, and then you'll choose which of the bosses you want to do next. You don't have to do this one next or 3rd or whatever. You can do it 5th. Realistically, you can do the other bosses first, depending on the strength of your raiders, which is awesome. So, I mean, we'll see how the difficulties pan out. This should be an okay boss for, a 4th or 5th boss. The other ones may be a little bit simpler as well, though. But yeah, let me know if there's any questions about this one. Otherwise, yeah, you got some good notes there. Do we have healing rotation cooldowns? Yeah, we sure do. We absolutely do. This is something we'll share with you guys at some point, or I will set up templates for you guys in terms of, how we have healing cooldowns assigned, right? Something like this is something that we have set up for the guild right now, right? Where the positioning is, you can see your admiral side, how we're moving things, engineer side, movement and positioning. Again, cooldowns that are assigned right now, things may change, charge bait, that's more for charging for little demons. Pods, who's going in the pods, right? Every single time, who's clicking the shields. Bran is clicking the shields with our backup as Jungolina. Who's interrupting the the pyromancers, all that stuff. So we'll share something similar. We don't want to share everything with with the public just because we put a lot of work into it, and it's be respectful of our raid leads and our players that actually put in a lot of work with this. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell there for Antoran High Command. Which, I mean, it'll be an okay boss. Yeah, it'll be okay. All right, let's move on to the next boss if you guys have no other questions. Next boss we can go over. Let's go over